Hey guys, it's Kevin, my review for the live-action remake of Aladdin. And of course, what Aladdin is essentially about is we center on our main character. He is this street urchin, basically, and basically he is trying to vie for the affections of Princess Jasmine, but one day he runs into this sorcerer named Jafar. Jafar wants him to retrieve this lamp for him in the Cave of Wonders, and so he goes in there, and he ends up finding this genie, and basically with this genie by his side who can give him 3 wishes, he basically decides that he's going to use one of his wishes to become a prince, hoping to win Jasmine's affections, but also hopefully, but also starts to not stay true to himself and things like that. And you guys know pretty much the story. And honestly, I don't really think I have to get into it that much. I was absolutely dreading this film. I mean, this is not shocking to any of you. I have been very vocal on pretty much all of my social media, Twitter, Instagram, I mean, you name it. I was very adamant about how much I was dreading this film. Just the idea of them remaking it just absolutely annoyed me. I felt very repulsed by the fact that this was going to be a thing. And look, maybe it's because I'm a little biased. As Aladdin, for me, if you had to ask me, which I know it's a hard question, but if you had to ask me, like, what is my favorite Disney film, most likely the answer would be Aladdin. I think the story is so interesting, the world, the mythology, there's so much you can do with it, and it's a story I hold very near and dear to me, but it also is one that I find pretty perfect, and I don't really understand why anyone would want to remake it. I don't think there's anything there that would enhance the film in any way, shape, or form. And also considering that this is a very heavily animated film and it really does utilize that medium, I just did not know if it was going to translate that well. I mean, the very awful CGI that we saw, just the piss poor staging and all, it did not look like it was going to be a good film. So I went into it, the reviews were a little more positive than I expected, but that did not mean that it at all changed my opinion of what I thought the film was going to be. I went into it not really expecting anything. I was in a very cynical mood, and I came out of it a little bit surprised. And look, I will say this. How is Aladdin overall? It's fine. It's fine. That's the best way to sum it up. This film is a huge mixed bag for me. There are things I like and things I don't like. It's not a terrible film, surprisingly. There are things that do work here, but it definitely is not a good film, and it is wholly unnecessary, and there really is no way to get around that, but we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And like a lot of things in this film, right off the bat, we have something that is very much a mixed bag for me. There are some performers here that I think are really good, and some that I don't think are that great. Let's first talk about Mena Massoud, who I was really not that familiar with prior to this film, but I was hoping that this could be one of those instances where, Disney finds someone who's relatively unknown, and they possibly find this rising star, and they become something, really great. And look, I can't say how he is as an actor, just based on this film, though. I was not really that big of a fan of him. He's not terrible in the role. He just seems like it was a bit too big of a role for him. It seems like he's trying very hard to replicate what Scott Wanger did in the original film, and there are times where he definitely does show a bit of charisma. He definitely does show a capability to him, but just this role overall, it just didn't really work for me. He kind of just had the same vocal tone throughout it. I didn't really feel like he got to show off his acting chops all that much here, and just in general, I just wasn't a huge fan of him. There are definitely moments where I think he's a bit convincing, but for the most part, I just thought he was fairly bland here. He felt much more like the lead in a high school production of Aladdin than the lead in a big Hollywood live-action adaptation. It didn't really work for me. I feel like if they got a more experienced actor, it would have worked. I'm all for, ushering in new talent. I love that idea, but just his performance just did not really work all that well for me, and he wasn't bad necessarily. I just thought in general he was fairly average, and I think his inexperience is what really killed this role for me. However, the two performances that do actually work here for me, one is Naomi Scott, who I thought was fantastic as Princess Jasmine. I really liked her in this role. Without spoiling anything, they give Jasmine a lot more to do here. She is a very different type of character. She's a lot more headstrong, she's a lot more independent, and she's a lot more vocal about what she wants. And Scott did a very good job with that. You understand what Jasmine is going through and how she feels very, she doesn't really feel like her voice is being heard. And I thought Scott did a very good job with that. She's very fun in the role. She's very likable. And her and Mena Massoud actually do have pretty good chemistry, despite the fact that, like I said, Mena Massoud I didn't think was that great. I thought their chemistry overall was really good here. I did overall think they worked well together, and I was impressed by them. And honestly, one of the, again, as unnecessary as this film is, I do think Scott brought something to the role that Linda Larkin in the original just didn't, and I do think she overall did a great job here. Easily the biggest surprise for me in this film, though, was Will Smith. Going into this, that was the thing that I was dreading the most. And look, Robin Williams is so synonymous with this role as the genie, and, when we think of the genie, those two really are one and the same, that it is hard to see anyone, basically fulfill his shoes and try to fill the void that he left. And I have seen it done well before. I mean, James Monroe Iglehart in the Broadway musical and things like that, he did a really great job. But just everything about Will Smith, it did not seem like a good casting choice to me. It seemed like he was just kind of here as a first choice. And I have to say, are there points where it's very awkward? Yes, there are definitely points where you can see what he's trying to do, but it's not really working. But there are points where I thought he was legitimately a lot of fun. He brought a lot of energy to this role. He clearly was enjoying what he was doing, and I was overall impressed by him. He's doing something different as the genie, and for the most part, it does work quite well. There are honestly times where he does try to replicate that of Williams, and he doesn't do it quite as well as he did, but overall, this is a different type of genie, and I think if we look past that, I think Smith actually gives a good performance here, and I was overall impressed by him, like I said, despite having a few missteps along the way. The rest of the cast, on the other hand, not really doing much for me. Navid Negahban, an actor that I really do enjoy, but as the Sultan, he just came across very flat. The Sultan in the original, he's supposed to be a lot more dim-witted and just not very good at his job, and this guy was just kind of boring. I didn't really care that much about him. I didn't think he was really that great. Alan Tudyk, I did not think was a good Iago at all. I don't really think he understood the character all that much, and just, again, it's one of those things where you're just thinking about Gilbert Gottfried the whole time, and I just did not think he was very good. The new characters, how are they? Nasim Pedrad, I thought that she was alright. They never really gave her a lot to do here, but she definitely did the best with what she had. And Billy Magnussen, not in the movie that much, but when he is here, he is fine, I guess. Easily the worst performance, though, in the entire film is Marwan Kenzari as Jafar. And look, even people that like this film, I've heard people complain about it, and it's definitely warranted. I mean, that was the other big thing that I was very much against the idea of. Look, Jafar is supposed to have a very specific look to him, and I'll talk about that more with, like, the cinematography and things like that. But regardless, the biggest problem with Kenzari is that he doesn't do anything to elevate this role. There is not a single time where you feel that he is menacing. There's never a single time where you feel that sinister sort of side to Jafar that you're supposed to. He feels like nothing more than just a whiny, petulant child who isn't getting his way, and it just does not work here. Jafar in the original, yes, he was very adamant about what he wanted, but he was scary. He was intimidating. He was someone that seemed to outsmart everyone, and this Jafar, you just don't buy it, and Kenzari doesn't do much to make you buy into it. There are many times where I thought he was overacting, but there were also times where he felt very wooden to me. Just everything about this role, it just didn't work at all, and I don't understand what they were really trying to go for here. I wasn't really a fan of him. Really, the entire cast, like I said, minus Scott and Smith, no one really is all that great here, and I wasn't really that impressed by them, honestly. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, which honestly, the directing I think is one of this film's biggest problems. Guy Ritchie as a director, I can't say too much about him. I haven't really seen too many of his movies, but you can tell that Ritchie felt very overwhelmed by this film. That he was someone who clearly, I don't know who exactly decided to, put him on and decided that he would be the right person to direct this film. But with this demanding of a project, I think he got overwhelmed because his style here is very inconsistent. It's very hard to tell what he was trying to go for. There are times where the movie is trying to be like the original, and sometimes it does do a good job with that, but then it's trying to be a Guy Ritchie movie, and I just don't know what they were trying to go for here. Were they trying to go for a more realistic take on Aladdin? Were they trying to lean more into the mystical? I mean, it's very hard to tell, and Ritchie's direction just is not very good here. Anytime when the film is trying to be fun, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But when it tries to get serious, it just does not work that well. I don't think that he had a very clear idea of what he wanted to do. And that's especially true for the musical portion of this film. I just don't think he directed it very well. I feel like if you got a better director, this film could have turned out much better than it is. But his directing, it's just not very good here. And when you have a musical film, you want a director, especially when it's something that's this iconic, you want a director like, say, Rob Marshall or Bill Condon, people who have worked on musicals before. Guy Ritchie has no prior experience, so it's easy to understand why most of this movie, his direction just feels very confusing and kind of stagnant. There wasn't much of a style here. I was very let down by I wasn't excited for his directing at all. I always thought he was like a weird choice, but this film did not convince me otherwise, unfortunately, and that's very sad to say. The writing, though, is really the biggest thing I want to talk about because, look, this is a story that I think is very well done, and the way the story was constructed in the original, it's very tight, it's a very simple story, it moves pretty quickly. There really is nothing in that story that needs to be changed, and I'm just going to say right now, the new elements brought to this story, most of them don't enhance anything. There is one change that legitimately does work, and that's that of Princess Jasmine. What they do with her, it makes a lot of sense. The type of character they're portraying here, Jasmine is the same Jasmine that we know, but she's a little bit more headstrong. She's a little bit more, she wants to be a little bit more noticed, and she's someone that is very persistent on what she really wants. And I thought they did a very good job with that. Where they take Jasmine, I thought was genuinely really well done. And this might be due to Scott's acting, but I thought overall that was actually really well done. I liked what they were adding to her. There was an element to the character that was not there before, and that was something I legitimately did enjoy. I appreciated what they tried to do for Jasmine, and I thought overall that was very well done here. And the story overall, it is well told, I suppose, but it just feels a lot lesser than it is. A lot of things that shouldn't be padded out are here, and a lot of it's just that the movie had to be 2 hours because I guess since all the other Disney live action remakes have clocked to that, have been clocking in at 2 hours. This one, for some reason, had to be. And a lot of it does feel quite superfluous. Aside from, like I said, that of, Jasmine's arc, there is nothing else here that feels like it needed to be in this film. The genie, for example. When the genie is just being quirky and fun, he definitely does a good job with that. Like I said, Smith does the best he can to fulfill the shoes, but this is not the same genie. This genie is much different than the one you saw in the original, and they make a specific choice with him, and I just don't think it worked. I get what they were going for. I really do. I get what they were going for, but for me, it just did not work at all, and there's a specific subplot with him that felt so unnecessary and so forced, and it really just seemed like it was here because the plot demanded it, and it doesn't really make any sense, whatsoever in hindsight. They don't do much. I get what they were trying to do, I really do, but they don't do much to sell you on this subplot where they end up taking the genie. It's an idea, but they don't really flesh it out that much, so it's very hard to buy into it, and I don't think they did a very good job with that at all. And that leads me to the new characters who really don't serve any purpose here whatsoever. Dahlia, for example, she's just kind of Jasmine's confidant. There's one other reason for her to be here that I don't want to spoil, but her character just didn't really add much of anything to the story. I didn't really think that she was that interesting. Easily the most unnecessary, though, has to be Billy Magnussen. I don't know why he was here. I don't understand the point of Prince Anders other than they wanted to replace him with that of Jafar's role. I mean, Jafar in the original, from the beginning, he wants to marry Princess Jasmine. This is something he is very adamant about. This is something that he is constantly manipulating the Sultan because of it, because he wants to marry Jasmine so he can have all that power and things like that. But here, on the other hand, they try to do that, but also try to factor in Prince Anders, and I don't understand what the point of him was, other than, oh, Billy Magnussen's a really funny guy, which he is, but he serves no purpose in this movie. They also give Jafar this henchman for some reason, Hakim, and I'm just sitting there like, why is he here? Like, what's the point of him? You already have Iago. You already have Iago as Jafar's sort of sidekick. Why do we need this guy? Again, he doesn't really serve much of a purpose in here either, and honestly, there really is not much here that makes this story better. There's nothing here that at least I thought was necessary to this story, and it just... Another major complaint I had is what they decided to do with Aladdin and Jasmine here. They have a lot more interaction in this movie prior to him becoming Prince Ali. And in the original, obviously, you know, if you've seen the movie, Jasmine buys into this. She doesn't realize that this is the same person. In the original, it works because they've had one interaction, and you can think, okay, you know, she hasn't seen him for a while. Maybe she forgot his voice or something like that. You know, maybe it wasn't that memorable of an interaction. So, okay, that's easy to buy into. Here, they have at least 2 or 3 interactions before he does transition into that prince. And it just... especially with the character of Jasmine, someone who's supposed to be a lot more intelligent and a lot more in on things, the fact that she is buying into this the way she is, it just doesn't work at all. It kind of makes her look really dumb, and I don't get what they were going for. There is one instance where she sort of starts to pick up on the fact, but then somehow Aladdin's able to shut it down and convinces her otherwise, and I just didn't buy it. I mean, again, if you were going to do that, you should have had them interact once in the film, and obviously they need to do that for the plot's sake, but it's one of those things where they only do it because the plot demands it, and honestly, I feel like you could have gone a different direction with that, considering that these two had already met. I think it would have been wiser if at that scene he just reveals to her, yeah, I'm Aladdin. Obviously, he's not going to do that because of the story and things like that, but they just kind of wrote themselves into a corner there, and I don't think it worked very well at all. And like I said, a lot of these characters, they're just not the same as what they're supposed to be. The Sultan's a very good example of that. The Sultan, like I said, he's supposed to be very dim-witted. He's supposed to be someone who is very easily manipulated. And here, he just felt like a regular guy. There was nothing that stuck out about him. Navid honestly made him quite boring, and I just was not into him. But again, that's nothing compared to Jafar. Jafar, I get what they were going for here. He's supposed to be someone that you wouldn't look at him and say, that's a villain. I get that, but because of that, it strips away all of his menace. It strips away all of the sort of suspense we felt with that character, and instead gives us, like I said, someone who feels much weaker in comparison. I don't really understand why everyone is so fearful of this guy. He just seems like a child to me. I just didn't buy into the fact that this guy was evil, and it did not work overall. His turn, especially in the third act, I thought was hilariously dumb, and I just did not buy into it at all. So again, a lot of the writing here, some of it does work, mainly the things that we've already seen in the original film. That stuff does work. The stuff with Princess Jasmine, I did think was really well done, but virtually every other change here, it just feels superfluous. It feels like it's tacked on in order to pad the movie out, and it just didn't really work at all. So, like I said, the writing here I did not think was very good. The cinematography, look, I will say this, there are points where it doesn't look too bad. A lot of this, though, does very much feel like a school play, and I hate having to say that, but it does feel that cheap at points. It has a real sort of Disney Channel type feel to it. Nothing about it feels extravagant. It doesn't capture that feel that we've had from other Disney live-action films. Look, I know a lot of people don't like it, but look at the Beauty and the Beast remake. Look at the detail. Look at the costumes there. This doesn't compare. This looks rather cheap. There's really not a lot here that is impressive from a cinematography standpoint, and I just don't think they did a very good job with that. And I attribute that less to the cinematography and more just there are things in the animated movie that just are not going to translate well here. And a big example of that is, of course, the CGI. Look, we already know how bad it is, and yeah, it's terrible here. There is no getting around it, but there's other things that just don't look good. When Aladdin's going in the Cave of Wonders, it's not nearly as interesting. Jafar's staff, it looks laughably stupid. Things like, say, the different locations that they go to, it doesn't look real, and it just doesn't work at all, and I don't think they did a very good job with that. And this is one of those cases also where I think Ritchie's direction got in the way. There are many scenes where there's this unnecessary slow-mo, and I don't know what they were trying to go for there, but it really took me out of the movie. It's not that frequent, but whenever it happened, I was just like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, what is the point of this? Why is this scene suddenly in slow-mo? Like, is this supposed to be like a 90s action movie? Like, it didn't work at all, and I think, again, some of the cinematography wasn't bad. The costume design is not terrible, except on Jafar. That did not work at all, but that's mainly due to the casting and less of the costume design. But a lot of it feels very cheap, and it just didn't really work for me. The score, I will say this, the new song that Jasmine gets, Speechless, I thought was really good. I thought it added to her character. I thought they did a very good job with implementing that in there, and I actually enjoyed it quite a lot. In the same way that I think Evermore adds a lot of layers to the Beast character in Beauty and the Beast, I think Speechless adds a lot to Jasmine, because she didn't really have her own solo number, and I like that they gave that to her. That song I thought worked quite well. The problem is, the rest of the music here, while not bad, it's not bad necessarily, it just pales in comparison to the original, and I know you're not supposed to compare them, but just for me, it's impossible to do so because most of the songs that we hear in this film, they just feel extremely overproduced and modernized. And I get it, they're trying to go for a more sort of Bollywood type aesthetic. They're trying to cater more to, if they were in Agrabah, this is what the music would sound like. And I think they did a good job with that. The problem is it ruins a lot of the songs. Take A Whole New World, for example. Mena, Massoud, and Naomi Scott, their vocals are really good. Those two do work very well together, but the music is just way too modernized and overly produced, and it just did not work for me, and I just wasn't really a big fan of it. A lot of it felt like just karaoke versions, and from a musical standpoint, look, the Alan Menken score is still great. He does a great job with it. They definitely retain that pretty well, but the musical numbers themselves, they leave a lot to be desired. And again, I don't think they're bad necessarily, but they leave a lot to be desired, and I wanted a lot more from them. And these are some of the greatest songs, like, ever in a Disney movie. So the fact that they're not amazing is disappointing, to say the least, and I wasn't really a huge fan of them. I will say, though, the Friend Like Me sequence is actually really well done in this film. That is the thing I was actually most concerned about, but they do a lot of stuff with it creatively that I think actually worked quite well here. There's definitely moments where it's a little bit shaky, but I think overall it was actually a really good sequence, and I did appreciate it overall. And the editing, like I said, this movie is very unnecessarily long. There's about 30 minutes that you could easily shave off from this movie. There is no reason why this movie could not have been just like an hour 40. I don't understand why it had to be 2 hours, other than the fact that, like I said, the plot demanded it. I don't understand why it had to be as long as it is, and it really did pad the movie out for me, and I just wasn't a fan of it at all. Also, I will say, as much as I didn't hate this movie, the third act is legitimately terrible. And that's the thing I was honestly most concerned about. They go much heavier in terms of the action, and it does not look good. It does not look good at all, especially since you already don't buy Jafar as this very powerful sorcerer. It falls completely flat. The whole thing is it's very rushed, and just in general, it honestly is really cringy at points. I wouldn't say the whole film is, but the third act is really when I started to get annoyed, and I do think that the third act does kill a lot of the film for me, for sure. So like I said, this is not a terrible movie. I know it seems like I'm trashing on it a lot, and it's because the things that I really don't like at all, particularly the third act, which I just think is absolutely horrible, the direction they take things in, but really it's attributed to one thing. Aladdin just does not work as a live action film. I've said this pretty much since it was announced, and I still very much do maintain that this was just never going to work in live action. It's too fantasy driven. The animation, it plays a specific part. It's one of the reasons why the movie is as good as it is. And when it's taken away, it just isn't as good. Things like Iago, things like the Cave of Wonders, things like the Genie, they're just not believable in live action, and they really do kill the film. Naomi Scott and Will Smith, they do the best that they can do. I think Scott is definitely the strongest out of everyone. Smith does a good job too, but Scott I definitely think was the strongest in terms of acting. They did add a lot of stuff to Princess Jasmine, which I did appreciate. But other than that, there is nothing about this film that tells me this is a necessary remake. This is something that needed to happen, and it kind of upsets me that kids of today are probably going to grow up with this version more likely than they are to grow up with the Disney version. And thank God for Disney Plus. Hopefully that will change that, but I just hope that doesn't happen, because the whole movie, again, while I didn't hate it, a lot of the time I was just thinking this would be much better if it was animated. This would be much better if I was just watching the animated version, and I would very much stick to that. I really can't see how you can watch this movie and tell me, oh, that's better than the animated version, because it just isn't. There's things here that I see what they were trying to go for here, but just ultimately, I just don't think this film worked as well as they wanted it to. It has very odd directing from Guy Ritchie. I really don't know what he was trying to go for. It has a score that is way too overly produced. It has cinematography that just looks very cheap and things like that. And just overall, while it wasn't as bad as what I thought it was going to be, it pretty much was as average as I think this could have turned out. And for me, I just was not at all a fan. So overall, I am going to give the live action remake of Aladdin a C. So overall, guys, in my thoughts on Aladdin, let me know what you guys saw this movie overall, left your thoughts on it. Like I said, I know I might have come across as a little biased, but I just don't like this idea. I don't like that Disney is cashing in and remaking all of these films. It feels very soulless, it feels very corporate, and it just feels like they're just doing it because they can. That's it. There's really no other reason to. I don't even, especially with Disney Plus coming out, I don't even see the point of these happening anymore. I don't understand why, but either way, I mean, this is not the last live-action remake we're getting. We still have 2 more coming this year, and hopefully they're better than this, but we'll have to see. But either way, guys, in my review, hope you guys enjoy. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.